So today I'll talk about the Washington Redskins and what I think their draft strategy maybe will be or should be, and what ultimately their biggest needs are heading into next month's 2014 NFL Draft. Now, to understand where the Washington Redskins may be going, it's important to understand where they've come from over the past few years. So let's start off by taking a look at the Redskins' performance in the draft over the past 3 years. Now, they've had some hits. Ryan Kerrigan, their first round pick in 2011, obviously has been a success. They had a couple of successful mid-round to late-round picks in the 2012 draft, Kirk Cousins being a fourth-round pick, and Alfred Morris from Florida Atlantic being a sixth-round pick. You know, when you get guys like that that can come in and contribute in the fourth and sixth round, that really helps your organization. Last year, a mid-round pick in Jordan Reed out of Florida, the tight end, they've had some success with some guys in the middle to late portions of the round. Even this past draft, a guy, again, like maybe a David Amerson, a guy who looks like he could be a starter for a few years for the Redskins. They've had some hits, but they've also had some misses. And I suppose you could say that about every team. But they've missed on some guys in the mid and late portions of the draft over the past couple of years. In 2011, they were in a position where they could have drafted somebody like a Randall Cobb. Maybe if they'd have drafted a Randall Cobb, they wouldn't have had to go out and pay big money to a Deshaun Jackson. Maybe a Justin Houston, who was available for them to take in 2011. Maybe if they would have drafted him, they wouldn't have had to give the franchise tender to a Brian Arakpo. A guy like Jordan Cameron, again, he was available in the late third round, early portion of the fourth round in 2011, and they passed on him. 2012, guys like T.Y. Hilton and Donald Stevenson, even this past draft, guys in the fifth round like Zach Stacy and Jordan Mills. So they've missed out on some guys. But ultimately, when it comes to the Redskins draft, in recent times, it's all about the RG3 trade. In 2012, the Redskins originally had the sixth pick in the draft. They moved up 4 slots to where the St. Louis Rams were at number 2, and they gave up not only that number 6 overall pick, a second-round pick in 2012, and first-round picks in 2013 and 2014. So ultimately, a lot of what they do in the draft in recent years is going to be measured ultimately on the success and or failures of an RG3 and whether he truly establishes himself as a franchise quarterback, as a leader, as a guy that could take that organization at or near the promised land, or if he will ultimately be remembered as kind of a me-first, selfish RG-me type of player. When you look at this RG3 trade back in 2012, you could sit there and say that this was very costly. Maybe this should be a warning to teams that are eager to move up to get a quarterback. Because if it doesn't pan out all the way or even part of the way, you're giving up a lot, and you're always going to end up giving up on the chance to get some really good players. Like, for example, if the Redskins would have sat there and kept these picks and not traded up for RG3, they could have stayed put at number 6 and drafted Ryan Tannehill. How much worse off would they really be as an organization? In fact, I'd argue a lot better. Not only would they have a Tannehill, a bigger, stronger, more durable quarterback that is able to answer the bell every week, unlike an RG3, you also would have been able, maybe in the second round of that draft, instead of trading away that pick, you could have taken maybe an Alshon Jeffrey for an example. Just one example. There are a few examples because that was a good draft in 2012. You look at 2013, that first-round pick that they gave up, they could have sat there and taken somebody like a Cordero Patterson. Imagine a Ryan Tannehill in Washington with an Alfred Morris in the backfield and guys like Alshon Jeffrey and Cordero Patterson to throw the ball to, complemented by, let's say, a Pierre Garcon. And not to mention the fact that the Redskins had such a bad year in 2013, the number 2 overall pick. They could be in a position right now to draft a guy like a Sammy Watkins or a Greg Robinson or a Jadeveon Clowney or a Khalil Mack. So many options, so many possibilities that the Redskins have missed out on. It's hurt the overall depth of the organization. It's hurt the overall talent of the organization. It's a gamble. And ultimately, if RG3 pans out, then it's a gamble that's worth taking. But it's still a gamble, and it's still a big gamble. And it still impacts the Redskins organization to this day. That's why they had to be relatively active in the free agent market, that they got some of their salary cap space back because they need to be, because they don't have a first-round pick. So the chance to get a marquee guy in this really good draft isn't there. You've got picks in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round. They don't have any additional picks, just the 6 picks and no pick in round 1. In terms of draft strategy, what could they do? You could see an example of where they might trade up into the bottom 5 of round number 1 to get a guy that they really like and also be able to lock him up for an additional year. But again, it depends on the salary cap position of the Washington Redskins, in particular after this Deshaun Jackson signing, excuse me. You might also see this team be very active in the reverse. Instead of trying to move up once or twice to get some marquee guys, they might peel back with their second round pick. They might peel back again with their third round pick. They might peel back again with their fourth and or fifth round picks to accumulate more picks, because that might be what they need too. Because they need talent still on both sides of the football, regardless of what they did in free agency. This is still an organization that lacks talent on both sides of the football. And we saw that in 2013. It was something that was kind of masked a little bit in 2012. The biggest key for me with the Washington Redskins, at some point in time, they have to stop the bleeding and they have to stop the hurting. And what that means is no moves that jeopardize picks in any future drafts. Don't be sitting there and trying to trade up into the first round and cost yourself a second or third round next year. Don't sit there and do something really stupid trying to trade up from your second round position into the first round, and then also maybe trade up into the first round, again costing yourself next year's first round pick. Don't sit there and trade into the fourth round and give up a third round for next year. They have very few picks as it is. They need to sit there and make sure that they don't do anything that continues their deficiency on draft day. It's something the Redskins have been notorious for over the years, is just not having a lot of draft picks, and that needs to change. In terms of their draft needs and some of their areas of focus, I could see them targeting a corner early, a safety early, maybe wide receiver a little later on, outside linebacker. With Arakpo being franchised, are they going to lock him up long term, or in a draft that is relatively good and maybe rounds 2 through 4 with 3-4 outside linebackers, is it worth drafting a guy in the third or fourth round that could potentially replace Arakpo or be plugged in case him and or Kerrigan get hurt? They could also be looking at depth on the defensive line. There are a lot of different areas they could go. I still do argue, yes, that they could look at wide receiver, even bringing in an Andre Roberts, even bringing in a Deshaun Jackson, because one thing I feel like they really lack is that big physical red zone target on the outside. That's something that they just don't have. And even at the tight end position, that's not something that Jordan Reed is. That's not really his game. He's more about speed and athleticism and explosiveness than he is being that big, huge physical target in the red zone, that big safety blanket that a young quarterback like an RG3 would need. Now, this is a Redskins team that has made a lot of moves in the offseason, some good, maybe some not so good. But it is important here for them to do well in this 2014 NFL draft. If they do well, this is maybe a team that could have some thoughts of contending for the NFC least in 2014. And if they don't do well in this draft, then things could get really, really ugly in DC in 2014. If you thought 13 was bad, it's got nothing on what could happen if they draft poorly and they don't get some help this time around.